My parents left me bleeding helplessly while they went to celebrate the new achievement of the golden boy. Hey everyone, before we get started, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button like the post and turn on notifications because the channel has been struggling with views lately and most people do not even make it to the end, so your support really helps. Now let's get into it. Hey Reddit, my name is Jack, I am 30 years old, and my whole life has been a never-ending reminder that no matter what I did or achieved, I would always come second to my younger brother Eric, who is 27. Eric was the golden child, the one my parents put all their hopes, dreams, and money into. He was a baseball prodigy from a young age, and my parents treated his talent like it was the most important thing in the world they lived, and breathed. His games, his training, his future, and anything that did not revolve around baseball barely registered to them. Meanwhile, I was just there, the older brother who existed in the background while Eric soaked up all the attention. I was never jealous of his success, I just hated how one-sided everything was, because while my brother was their star athlete, I had my own passion. I loved motorcycles. Ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated by how things worked. I spent hours in the garage tinkering with engines, taking apart old parts, and putting them back together better than before while Eric was out on the field hitting home runs. I was covered in grease and oil, trying to breathe life back into old bikes. But the difference was when Eric won a game, my parents threw him a celebration. When I won a mechanical competition, I barely got a nod of acknowledgement. Money was another story entirely. My parents never hesitated to spend thousands on Eric's training, private coaching, the latest equipment, out-of-state tournaments, and anything else that might give him a leg up. But when I wanted to buy better tools or take a course to improve my skills, I was told to work for it. They made it clear that baseball was an investment, while my interests were just a hobby that I was expected to fund myself. By the time I was 17, I had already taken on 2 part-time jobs, one at an auto shop and another delivering pizzas, just so I could afford the equipment I needed. I remember one moment that stuck with me more than anything else. I had spent months working on my first custom motorcycle, using every spare dollar I had earned to buy parts piece by piece. It was my pride and joy, the first real thing I had built with my own hands. When I finally finished it, I called my dad over to take a look, hoping maybe, just maybe, he would see how much effort I had put into it. He glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds before saying, "That is nice, Jack, but you know, if you spent more time at the batting cages, you could be out there with Eric instead of playing around with this junk." That was the moment I realized I was wasting my time trying to get their approval. No matter what I did, it would never be enough, because to them, Eric's success was the only thing that mattered. I pushed down my frustration and kept working, knowing that if I wanted to make something of myself, I would have to do it on my own. By the time I turned 18, I knew I had to leave. I was done living in a house where I was always going to be an afterthought. So I took my savings and rented a small garage space in the cheapest part of town. It was nothing fancy, just a cramped space with barely enough room for a workbench and a couple of bikes. But it was mine, and that was all that mattered. At first, I worked on whatever I could get my hands on, fixing up old bikes, doing tune-ups, and slowly building a reputation. I poured every cent I made back into my business, working long hours and barely scraping by. But I did not care, because for the first time in my life, I was doing something for myself and not living in Eric's shadow. Years passed, and while my parents were still waiting for Eric to make it big in baseball, I was building something real. My little garage turned into a full-fledged motorcycle repair and customization shop. I had a loyal customer base and a steady income. Meanwhile, Eric's baseball career had not gone as planned. He was good, but not good enough. He spent a few years bouncing around minor league teams before realizing he was never going to make it to the big leagues. My parents still talked about him like he was on the verge of greatness, but deep down, they knew the truth. Despite all of this, they never really acknowledged my success. To them, I was just the kid who liked motorcycles, while Eric was the athlete who deserved all their attention. Even when I started making good money, they still treated my business like it was just a phase. Like one day, I would wake up and decide to do something that actually mattered to them. I stopped trying to prove myself to them a long time ago, because I knew it would never be enough. Jack's life after leaving his family was anything but easy. He worked 16-hour days, pouring everything he had into his small garage business, often going to bed long after midnight and waking up at dawn to start all over again. His living situation was as rough as his work schedule. The garage was not just his workshop, it was his home. He slept on an old folding cot pushed into the corner, surrounded by half-assembled engines, stacks of tools, and the constant scent of gasoline and metal. The only real comfort in his life was Max, his loyal German shepherd, who had been with him since he first left home. No matter how exhausting the days got or how uncertain the future seemed, Max was always there, curled up beside his cot at night and wagging his tail every morning like Jack was the best damn person in the world. The business was slowly growing, but it was still a daily battle. Some weeks were better than others, but there were months where Jack barely scraped by, living on cheap coffee and instant noodles while every dollar he made went back into keeping the shop running. He never regretted leaving his family, but there were nights when he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had made a mistake thinking he could do this all on his own. Then Mia came along. The first time Jack saw her, she was standing outside the empty storefront next to his garage, staring at the faded "For Lease" sign taped to the window. She was tall, with dark brown hair tied in a loose ponytail, wearing jeans and an old leather jacket that looked well-worn but well-loved. He figured she was just another person thinking about opening some pointless boutique that would last 6 months before shutting down like the last 3 businesses that had tried to make it in that space. He did not think much of it until the next week when he saw her again, this time hauling in supplies and furniture with a determined look on her face. Curiosity got the better of him, and one afternoon, when he had a rare break between customers, he wandered over and leaned against the doorway, watching as she unpacked a huge espresso machine that looked like it cost more than his entire garage. She glanced up, wiping a strand of hair from her face, and gave him a nod before going back to work. "You opening a coffee shop?" he asked, not sure why he even cared. "That's the plan," she said, setting down a stack of boxes. "I figured this side of town could use a decent one. Seems like people here survive on gas station coffee and vending machine snacks." Jack smirked because she was not wrong. The only options for caffeine within walking distance were a grimy old diner that served coffee, so burn it tasted like it had been brewed in an engine block, or the convenience store across the street. "Hope you like disappointment," he said, jerking his thumb toward his own garage. "This neighborhood isn't exactly booming." She shrugged, unfazed. "Neither is yours, but you are still here." That was the first time she caught him off guard, and it would not be the last. Over the next few weeks, they saw each other almost every day. Jack would step outside for a smoke or to stretch his legs, and Mia would be there, hauling bags of coffee beans, adjusting furniture, or testing out different setups for the shop. She worked just as hard as he did, and there was something about the way she carried herself that made him respect her almost immediately. One evening, after closing up his shop for the night, he heard music coming from the cafe. The place was still not officially open, but the door was slightly ajar, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted into the cool air. He peeked inside and saw her behind the counter, fiddling with a coffee grinder. "You planning on selling or just making yourself coffee all night?" he asked, stepping inside. Mia looked up and grinned. "You want to be my test subject?" Jack hesitated. He was a coffee guy, but he was not a fancy coffee guy. Still, there was something about the way she looked at him, expecting him to say yes, that made it impossible to say no. He walked over to the counter and took a seat on one of the stools. "Hit me with your best shot." She handed him a cup, watching closely as he took a sip. It was strong, smooth, and miles better than anything he had ever tasted. He raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. "Not bad," he admitted. Mia smirked. "Not bad. That might be the most reluctant compliment I have ever heard." From that night on, things changed. They started talking more, sometimes late into the night when Jack was too wired from work to sleep and Mia was still adjusting things in her shop. She was easy to talk to, even when he was exhausted, and she had this way of making him feel like he was not just some guy who spent his life covered in grease and motor oil. One day, as they sat outside the cafe, drinking coffee after an especially long workday, Mia glanced at the bikes parked outside his garage and asked, "So, do you just fix them, or do you ride too?" Jack looked at her, surprised. "You know about bikes?" She grinned, stretching her arms over her head. "My dad was a mechanic. I spent half my childhood in his shop. I am not an expert, but I know enough to tell when someone loves what they do." Something in her tone made Jack pause. He had spent his whole life surrounded by people who either dismissed what he did or treated it like some temporary phase he would eventually grow out of. But Mia saw it for what it was, something real, something he had built from nothing, something that mattered. Over time, his business started picking up. Word spread, more customers showed up, and for the first time, Jack started feeling like maybe things were actually turning around. He upgraded some of his equipment, hired a part-time assistant, and even started considering moving into an actual apartment instead of living in the garage. Life was still hard, but for the first time, it did not feel impossible. And Mia was still there, opening her shop in the mornings as he opened his garage, bringing him coffee when she knew he was too busy to take a break, and talking to him about things he had never really talked about with anyone before. Jack did not know what to make of it. She was smart, funny, and way too good for someone like him. He had spent so long assuming that no one really saw him that he did not quite know what to do when someone actually did. But she kept showing up, and for the first time in a long time, he started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was not completely alone in this world. It was just another long day at the shop, and Jack was in the middle of working on a custom bike, focused entirely on the precision required for the job. The plasma cutter hummed in his hands as he carefully shaped a section of the frame, the bright blue arc of light illuminating the darkened corners of the garage. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and the smell of burning metal filled the air, but he barely noticed. This was the part of his work he loved the most, the feeling of creating something out of raw steel, molding it into exactly what he envisioned. Everything was going smoothly until, in a fraction of a second, something went wrong. The blade of the plasma cutter skipped, jerking in his grip as if it had caught on something unexpected. Before he could react, a searing pain shot through his leg, white-hot and instant. He barely registered the sight before the realization crashed down on him. The blade had cut deep into his thigh, just above his knee. For a moment, everything slowed. He staggered backward, dropping the cutter as the pain erupted into something unbearable. Blood poured from the wound, pooling around his boot and soaking into the concrete floor. His breath came in short gasps, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. His hands trembled as he pressed them against the gash, but the blood was coming too fast, slipping between his fingers no matter how hard he pressed. Max, his ever-loyal companion, began barking frantically, his nails scraping against the floor as he rushed to Jack's side. The dog whined and pushed against him, his instincts kicking in as he tried to get Jack to respond. Jack clenched his jaw, trying to push through the fog of pain and shock, but he could already feel the cold sweat breaking out over his skin. His heart was pounding too fast, and his vision blurred at the edges. He needed help now. His phone was on the workbench, just a few feet away, but the act of standing felt impossible. Gritting his teeth, he dragged himself across the floor, his legs screaming with every inch he moved. Max stayed beside him, whining louder as if begging him not to give up. Finally, Jack's fingers closed around his phone, slick with blood as he unlocked it and scrolled through his contacts. There was only one number he thought to call, the one that had been programmed into him since childhood as the person to reach out to in emergencies. His mother. He hit the call button, pressing the phone against his ear as he struggled to keep himself upright. The ringing seemed to go on forever, each second stretching longer than the last. When she finally picked up, her voice was calm, almost detached, like she had barely glanced at the screen before answering. "Jack? What is it?" His voice came out hoarse and uneven, the pain making it hard to breathe. "Mom, I need help. I cut myself, bad. I'm bleeding a lot. I think I hit something serious. I need you to." Before he could even finish, she let out a quiet sigh, the kind of exasperated breath she used to make whenever he was interrupting something important. "Jack, we're busy right now," she said, her tone clipped and impatient. "Can't you just call an ambulance?" For a second, he thought he had misheard her. His grip tightened around the phone, blood smearing across the screen as he tried to steady himself. "Mom, Jesus, I'm losing a lot of blood. I don't think I can wait for." "We really can't deal with this right now," she interrupted, her voice as cold as it had ever been. "It's a big day for Eric. He just signed his contract, and we're celebrating. Just call 911, Jack. I'm sure you can handle it." The line went dead. Jack stared at the phone in disbelief, the world tilting slightly as his body swayed from blood loss. His mother, the person who had always told him to reach out if he ever needed anything, had just dismissed him like he was a minor inconvenience, like his life-threatening injury was less important than Eric's latest success. His hands shook as he dropped the phone onto the floor beside him, his breath ragged as he tried to keep himself conscious. He knew he had to act fast. His vision was beginning to darken at the edges, and the pain was becoming something distant, almost numb, which he knew was not a good sign. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to focus. He had survived on his own for years. He would survive this too. Max barked again, the sound sharp and desperate, as if urging him to stay awake. Jack took one last shuddering breath before dialing the only number that could actually help him. He had no choice now. He had to save himself. Jack's vision blurred as he struggled to keep himself upright, the phone slick with his own blood as he tried to steady his trembling hands. He knew he had to call for help, but his fingers were barely functioning, slipping against the screen every time he tried to dial. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat weaker than the last, his body rapidly losing the strength to fight against the blood pouring from his leg. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay awake, but the edges of his sight had already begun to darken. He tried again, his fingers shaking violently as he pressed against the screen, but it was useless. His hands were too slick, the blood smearing across the surface, preventing him from getting a solid grip. He let out a choked breath, a mix of frustration and fear, before switching to voice command. His throat was dry, his voice barely above a whisper, but he managed to say, "Call 911. Nothing happened. His phone, unable to recognize his strained, broken voice, stayed frozen on the home screen. He clenched his jaw, biting back the panic rising in his chest. knowing that every second wasted was another second closer to passing out. His entire body felt cold now, the warmth draining out of him with the blood pooling beneath him. Desperate, he switched tactics. If his parents would not help, maybe someone else would. He pulled up his father's contact, pressing the call button with what little strength he had left. The phone rang, each tone stretching unbearably long. The silence between them filled only with the sound of Max whining beside him. His breath hitched as the ringing stopped, but instead of his father's voice, all he got was an automated message. You have reached the voicemail of. He barely heard the rest before he ended the call, his heart sinking further into his chest. His father had ignored him, or worse, sent him straight to voicemail. He swallowed the lump in his throat, shaking as he tried one last option. His brother. Jack hesitated for only a second before dialing Eric's number, the blood loss making him lightheaded as he leaned heavily against the workbench, his free hand pressing against the gash in his leg. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times, and just as he thought it would go to voicemail like his father's, the line clicked open. For a brief moment, Jack felt a surge of relief, but it disappeared instantly when Eric's voice came through the speaker, slow and slurred. Yo, wait, who's this? There was laughter in the background, the sound of glasses clinking and loud music, and Jack could already picture the scene. His family celebrating, champagne glasses raised, toasting Eric's success while he lay bleeding out alone in his garage. Jack's voice was weak, barely audible, but he forced the words out. Eric, it's me. I need help, man. Jack. Eric interrupted, and there was a brief pause before he let out a breathy laugh, clearly drunk. Dude, thought you were someone else. We're kinda in the middle of a party here, bro. Big night, you know? This contract is. Jack's grip on the phone loosened, his head swimming as his body tilted dangerously to the side. His pulse was slowing, his muscles failing to hold him upright. Eric, listen. The line cut out. Jack stared at the phone, his brain struggling to process what had just happened. His brother, the one person who should have at least listened, had either hung up or lost interest mid-conversation. He had not even realized the urgency in Jack's voice. He had not even cared. A hollow feeling settled in Jack's chest, heavier than the pain in his leg, heavier than the exhaustion pressing down on his shoulders. It was not just his mother who had dismissed him, not just his father who had ignored his call. His entire family had made it clear exactly where he stood. They did not care. They had never cared. His grip slipped, the phone falling from his hand and hitting the floor with a dull thud. The sounds of the garage faded, Max's barking becoming distant as the darkness crept further into his vision. His body felt weightless now, the cold completely overtaking him, his thoughts slipping away one by one. Jack barely had time to register the moment his body gave in before the world around him faded to black. Max's barking echoed through the garage, sharp and relentless, his frantic yelps filling the empty space as he paced around Jack's limp body. The dog's nails scraped against the concrete floor as he nudged Jack's arm, whimpering desperately, but there was no response. Jack's breathing had slowed, his face pale and slick with sweat, his body dangerously still as the pool of blood beneath him grew larger. Then, the sound of hurried footsteps approached from outside, quick and urgent, barely audible over Max's barking. A second later, the garage door burst open with a force that sent it slamming against the wall. The rush of cool air cut through the thick scent of metal and blood as Mia stood in the doorway, her chest rising and falling from running, her eyes instantly locking onto Jack's collapsed form on the ground. Jack! Her voice was sharp with panic, but she did not hesitate. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him, her hands immediately pressing against the deep wound in his leg. Warm, sticky blood coated her fingers, and the sight made her stomach churn, but she forced herself to stay focused. Jack's skin was cold to the touch, his breath shallow, and his eyelids fluttered as if he were barely hanging on. Jack, can you hear me? Her voice was urgent, shaking as she pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed emergency services with one hand while the other kept pressure on the wound. I need an ambulance now, she said, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her throat. Severe blood loss, deep laceration to the leg. He's unconscious, but he's still breathing. The dispatcher's voice was steady, asking questions, giving instructions, but Mia barely registered the words. She needed to stop the bleeding, needed to keep Jack alive until help arrived. Without a second thought, she yanked her belt from her jeans, looping it around his thigh just above the wound. She tightened it as much as she could, her fingers fumbling slightly as adrenaline flooded her system. Jack let out a weak groan at the pressure, and relief surged through her at the small sign of life. Jack, stay with me, she pleaded, her voice cracking as she pressed her hands against his shoulders, trying to keep him grounded. Do not close your eyes, do you hear me? Do not you dare fall asleep on me. Jack's eyelids flickered slightly, his lips parting as if he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. His breathing was shallow, uneven, and Mia could feel his pulse beneath her fingertips growing weaker. Come on, Jack, stay with me, she whispered, her throat tightening as she leaned closer, her face just inches from his. You are not doing this. You are not leaving me. Help is coming. Just hold on a little longer. Max whimpered beside them, his body tense, his wide eyes locked onto Jack as if he understood the gravity of the situation. Mia swallowed hard, blinking back the sting of tears as she adjusted the makeshift tourniquet, tightening it just a little more. Jack, keep your eyes on me, okay? Just focus on my voice. For a second, his gaze lifted slightly, just enough to meet hers. His lips barely moved, a breathy whisper escaping before his body went completely limp. Mia's heart clenched as the weight of him sagged against her hands. No, no, no. Jack, stay with me. Jack, but his body did not respond. The last thing he heard before everything went silent was Mia's voice, desperate and unwavering, calling his name over and over as the world faded into darkness. Jack's eyes fluttered open to the harsh glare of fluorescent hospital lights, his entire body feeling like it had been run over by a freight train. His head was pounding, his throat was dry, and a dull, aching pain radiated from his leg, making every small movement feel impossible. The steady beep of machines filled the quiet room, and as his vision adjusted, the first thing he saw was Mia, sitting in a chair beside his bed, her hands clasped together in her lap, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. The moment she noticed him stir, relief flooded her face, and she shot up from her chair, leaning closer as if making sure she was not imagining it. Jack, she breathed, her voice shaky. You are awake. Jack tried to respond, but his throat was raw, and all that came out was a hoarse sound. Mia immediately grabbed a cup of water from the bedside table, bringing the straw to his lips, and he took a few slow sips, the cool liquid soothing the burning dryness in his throat. You scared the hell out of me, she said, her voice softer now, but he could hear the unsteady tremor in it. You lost so much blood. If I had not found you when I did. She trailed off, shaking her head as if refusing to let herself think about that possibility. Before Jack could say anything, the door swung open, and a doctor stepped in, flipping through a chart as he approached the bed. He was an older man, with sharp, tired eyes that had clearly seen more than their fair share of close calls. Good to see you awake, Jack, the doctor said, glancing up from the chart with a small nod. You gave us a hell of a time in the ER. Another 5 minutes, and you would not have made it. The words settled over him like a lead weight. He had known it was bad, but hearing how close he had come to dying made his stomach churn. He exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting to Mia, who was watching him with barely concealed worry. The doctor continued, his tone serious but not unkind. The injury to your leg was severe. You severed a major artery, which is why you lost so much blood. We managed to stabilize you, but the damage was extensive. You are going to need multiple surgeries, and even after that, walking will not be easy. With the right rehab, you can regain strength, but it is not going to be a quick recovery. Jack clenched his jaw, his mind already racing with what this meant. His work, his shop, everything he had built, it all depended on him being able to move, to stand for long hours, to work with precision. If he could not do that, then what? As if sensing his thoughts, Mia reached out, her fingers lightly brushing his wrist. You are going to get through this, she said firmly. We will figure it out. Jack wanted to believe her, but before he could even begin to process what any of this meant, his phone vibrated on the nightstand. He turned his head, his brows furrowing slightly. He had not expected anyone to call. Mia grabbed the phone for him, checking the screen before giving him a confused look. It is your dad. Jack's stomach twisted at those words. His parents had ignored him when he had called them for help. They had left him to bleed out alone. But now, suddenly, they were reaching out? His gut told him exactly what this was about. But some part of him still wanted to believe, just for a second, that maybe they had finally realized what they had done. Maybe they actually cared. He swallowed hard and took the phone from Mia, pressing the answer button with a shaky breath. Hello. His voice was rough, strained from exhaustion and everything his body had been through. His father's voice came through the line, calm and completely devoid of any concern. Jack, glad I caught you. Jack blinked, gripping the phone tighter. You. He had to stop himself, his throat tightening. Do you even know where I am right now? There was a brief pause before his father let out a sigh, the kind of exasperated breath he always used when Jack was being an inconvenience. Look, I do not have a lot of time. Your mother and I need some help. Eric has some unexpected expenses with his new contract, and we need $25,000 to cover everything. Jack felt something inside him snap. His pulse pounded in his ears, a mix of anger, disbelief, and something dangerously close to heartbreak crashing over him all at once. He had almost died less than 24 hours ago, and they had not even called to check if he was alive. But now they needed money for Eric, and suddenly, he was worth calling. His grip on the phone was white-knuckled as his voice rose, raw with emotion. I almost died yesterday. Did you know that? Did you even care? I called Mom while I was bleeding out on my own damn floor, and she told me you were too busy celebrating Eric. I could have died, and you did not even. Jack, his father interrupted, his tone dismissive, as if he were talking to a child throwing a tantrum. Do not be so dramatic. You are fine now, and that is what matters. Let's not make this into something it is not. Jack's breath caught in his throat, his entire body tensing as a cold, sickening realization settled over him. There was no coming back from this. No fixing it. No moment of clarity where his parents would finally see him for who he was instead of who they had decided he should be. They had never cared, and they never would. He closed his eyes for a brief second, exhaling through his nose before speaking again, his voice dangerously quiet. I am not giving you a damn cent. Do not call me again. Before his father could say another word, he ended the call and tossed the phone onto the bed beside him. His hands were shaking, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths as he stared at the ceiling, trying to steady himself. Mia was silent for a long moment before she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. Jack, she said softly, you do not owe them anything. Jack swallowed hard, his throat thick with emotions he did not know how to process. He had spent his entire life waiting for his family to see him, to acknowledge him, to love him the way they had always loved Eric. But now, lying in a hospital bed, realizing just how close he had come to losing everything, he finally saw the truth. They never would. And for the first time, he was okay with that. Jack lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling as the weight of the last 24 hours settled over him like a crushing force. His body was weak, his leg barely responsive beneath the heavy bandages, but the pain he felt now had nothing to do with his injuries. His father's words echoed in his head over and over again, each repetition hammering in the brutal truth he had spent years refusing to acknowledge. He was not a son to them. He was not family. He was a bank account, a financial safety net they could tap into whenever Eric needed something. His life, his struggles, his near-death experience had meant nothing to them, not compared to the importance of Eric's career. His fingers trembled as he reached for his phone again, not to call them back, not to plead for understanding, but to finally take control of what he should have done a long time ago. He opened his banking app, scrolling through the recurring transactions that had been set up for years. Every month, a significant chunk of his income had been automatically sent to his parents. He had convinced himself it was his way of showing appreciation, of proving that he could be successful in his own way, that he was worth something. But it had never been about gratitude. It had never been about love. It had always been about control. With a deep breath, he canceled every single payment. A confirmation message popped up on the screen asking if he was sure he wanted to proceed. His thumb hovered over the option for a split second before pressing down with finality. The transactions disappeared, and for the first time in years, Jack felt something close to relief. There was no going back. He had given them enough. More than enough. Mia watched him from the chair beside his bed, her expression unreadable, but there was something warm in her eyes, something steady that kept him from spiraling into doubt. He exhaled, running a hand over his face as the tension in his chest began to ease, though the pain of realization still lingered. They only call when they need something, he said quietly, his voice raw. It was never about me. It was never going to be. Mia reached out, taking his hand in hers without hesitation. Then let them go, she said simply, her grip firm as if anchoring him in place. You do not owe them anything, Jack. You never did. Jack swallowed hard, blinking against the burning in his eyes. He had spent his whole life trying to be enough for them, bending over backward to prove that he was worth their love, their attention, their time. And for what? So they could turn their backs on him when he needed them most? So they could treat him like an afterthought, a disposable resource to be used and discarded? He squeezed Mia's hand, grounding himself in the warmth of her touch. I cannot do this anymore, he admitted, the words tasting like something final. I am done. Mia nodded, her expression soft but unwavering. Good, she said, giving his hand a small squeeze. Because you have people who actually care about you. Me. Max. You are not alone in this, Jack. He let out a slow breath, his eyes flickering to the loyal dog curled up at the foot of his hospital bed, his ears twitching at the sound of his name. Max had never left his side, had never failed him, had been there through every hardship without question or condition. And now, Mia was here too. Jack had spent so long trying to hold on to a family that had never truly been his. But maybe family was not about blood. Maybe it was about the people who stood by you when you had nothing left to give. For the first time in his life, Jack was ready to let go. Recovery was slow and unforgiving. Jack had always been the kind of person who relied on his own strength, on his ability to push through anything. But no amount of sheer willpower could change the reality of his injury. The surgeries were brutal, the physical therapy exhausting, and every step he took forward felt like 2 steps back. The doctors had been right. He would never move the same way again. His leg was weak, stiff, and uncooperative, and though he could walk, standing for long hours, bending, or working on bikes the way he used to was no longer an option. At first, the frustration nearly consumed him. His shop had been his life, the only thing he had built entirely on his own, and now it felt like it was slipping away from him. Every time he tried to push himself too hard, the pain reminded him of the limits his body had set. He spent weeks trying to find workarounds, ways to keep running the shop as before, but eventually, he had to face the truth. He could not do this anymore. Not the way he used to. Mia saw the struggle before he even admitted it to himself. She never pushed, never told him what he should do, but one night, as they sat outside the garage with Max at their feet, she finally spoke up. "You are still Jack," she said, watching him carefully. "You are still the guy who built something incredible from nothing. You just need to find a different way to do it." Jack let out a bitter breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "And what? Sit behind a desk and manage orders while someone else does the work? That is not who I am, Mia." "No," she said, tilting her head. "But you are someone who knows more about motorcycles than anyone I have ever met. And there are kids out there, young guys who dream of learning what you know, but they do not have a clue where to start. Why not teach them?" Jack frowned, turning the idea over in his mind. He had never considered himself a teacher. He had never been one for long explanations or step-by-step instructions. But the thought of passing on his skills, of helping someone else the way he had once wished someone had helped him, sparked something in him that he had not felt in a long time. The next day, he put out a simple message in the shop's window. "Motorcycle mechanics training, beginners welcome." He did not expect much, maybe a few curious faces, but within a week, a boy no older than 17 showed up at the garage, shifting nervously from foot to foot as he introduced himself. His name was Lucas, and he had been coming by the shop for months just to watch Jack work, always too shy to approach, but fascinated by everything Jack did. Now, with the training program open, he had finally built up the courage to ask if he could learn. Jack hesitated at first, unsure of whether he had the patience for teaching, but the moment he saw the excitement in the kid's eyes as he explained how an engine worked, something clicked. He had spent his entire life proving himself to people who never cared, but here was someone who actually wanted to listen, someone who wanted to learn. One student turned into 2, then 5, then more. Word spread quickly, and before long, the shop was no longer just a repair business. It was a training center, a place where young guys with grease-stained hands and eager eyes came to learn from someone who had lived it. Jack's days were no easier than before, but they were different. For the first time, he was not just working to survive. He was building something bigger than himself. Months passed, and for the first time in his life, Jack felt like he had truly found his purpose. But, just as things were finally settling into place, his past came knocking on his door again. It happened on a quiet afternoon. He had just finished a session with Lucas and was wiping oil from his hands when the sound of footsteps echoed through the garage. When he looked up, his stomach twisted at the sight of his parents standing in the doorway. They had the same carefully composed expressions they always wore, but there was something different this time. The confidence they had always carried was gone, replaced by something else, something desperate. His father cleared his throat, adjusting his watch as if trying to maintain some semblance of control. "Jack, we need to talk." Jack did not move. He did not invite them in. He simply crossed his arms and stared at them. "About what?" His mother took a step forward, her voice softer, carefully measured. "We need your help. Things have changed." Jack clenched his jaw. He already knew where this was going, but he let them speak anyway. "Eric is in trouble," his father admitted, rubbing a hand over his forehead. "The team let him go. His performance has not been where it needs to be, and with the contract issues, things have gotten complicated." Jack said nothing, waiting. His mother hesitated before continuing. "We also lost the house. Your father made some financial miscalculations, and with the economy." Jack let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "You lost the house. Eric lost his career. And now what? You want me to bail you out?" His father's jaw tightened. "This is your family, Jack. We supported you when you needed it. It is time for you to do the same." Jack stepped forward then, slow and deliberate, until he was only a few feet away from them. "Supported me?" His voice was low, steady, but there was something dangerous underneath. "Where was that support when I was bleeding out on the floor of my garage? Where was it when I called you, when I begged for help? His mother flinched slightly, but his father held firm. Jack, do not. No. Jack cut him off, his voice rising. You made it clear exactly what I was to you. I was a paycheck, nothing more. And now, because Eric is not your golden boy anymore, you come to me expecting me to fix your mess? His mother's eyes pleaded with him, her voice dropping into something almost fragile. We just need a little help, Jack. Please. Jack exhaled slowly, shaking his head. No. His father's expression darkened. You are going to throw your own family out like this? Jack met his gaze, unflinching. You threw me out a long time ago. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, without another word, Jack turned on his heel and walked away. He did not look back as he reached the garage door and pulled it open, gesturing for them to leave. His father hesitated, his pride keeping him frozen in place, but eventually, he grabbed his wife's arm and led her outside. Jack stood there, watching as they disappeared down the street, knowing this time, they would not be back. Mia stepped out from the office, arms crossed as she leaned against the doorframe. You okay? Jack let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He turned to her, a slow smile creeping onto his face. Yeah, he said, feeling lighter than he had in years. I think I am. For the first time, he was not looking back. He was looking forward, and the road ahead had never looked clearer. Jack had not thought about his parents or Eric in months. Ever since he had thrown them out of his garage, he had moved forward without looking back. His days were filled with something real, something meaningful, and for the first time in his life, he did not feel like he was chasing after validation from people who had never truly cared about him. Instead, he had built something far greater than he had ever imagined. The motorcycle training program had taken off in a way he never expected. What started as a few lessons with a handful of eager students had grown into something much bigger. With Mia by his side, helping him organize and plan, they had turned his once small garage into a fully established motorcycle school, a place where young riders and mechanics alike could come to learn, to work, and to build something for themselves. They had hired instructors, expanded their space, and even started getting recognition from larger organizations that wanted to partner with them. It was not just a business anymore. It was a legacy, something Jack could proudly say he had built from the ground up with his own hands, without a single ounce of help from the people who had once looked down on him. Meanwhile, his parents had lost everything. The house, the cushy lifestyle, the constant flow of money, gone. Jack had not seen them since the day he turned them away, but word had spread fast. His father had been forced into early retirement after making reckless financial decisions that backfired. His mother, once obsessed with appearances and social standing, had vanished from the social circles she had once ruled over, no longer able to keep up the illusion of wealth. They had gone from a family who once saw themselves as untouchable to a couple struggling to get by. And Eric, the golden boy who had once been their pride and joy, had faded into complete irrelevance. Without his contract, without the support of the team, he had nowhere to go but back to a life that terrified him. He had spent his entire youth being treated like a star, convinced that he was destined for greatness, but in the end, he had ended up exactly where he never wanted to be, just another guy with a washed-up dream. Now, he worked as a high school baseball coach, stuck reliving his past through the eyes of teenage boys who would one day surpass him. He had no fame, no fortune, and no future beyond teaching drills on a field that was a far cry from the stadiums he had once imagined himself playing in. Jack should have felt something about all of this. He should have felt satisfaction, maybe even a sense of justice. But the truth was, he just felt nothing at all. He had spent too many years caring about people who had never cared about him, and now, they were nothing more than ghosts of a past he had no interest in revisiting. One evening, as he locked up the shop for the night, he pulled out his phone to check his messages. Most of them were from students asking about upcoming classes, a few from Mia reminding him about a meeting they had scheduled for the next morning, and then, buried among them, a name he had not seen in a long time. Eric. Jack stared at the screen for a moment before opening the message. Can you help me? That was it. No apology, no explanation, just 3 simple words. Jack exhaled slowly, his grip tightening around the phone as he let the words settle. It was not anger that filled him. It was not resentment or even bitterness. It was clarity. He typed out his response without hesitation. I already found my real family. Before he could second-guess himself, he pressed send, then went to his contacts, found Eric's name, and blocked the number. There was no hesitation, no regret. Jack slid his phone back into his pocket, turned to where Mia was waiting for him by the door, and gave her a small nod. She smiled, already knowing what had just happened without needing to ask. As they walked out together, Max trotting happily at their side, Jack felt nothing but peace. The life he had built, the people who stood by him, the work he had dedicated himself to. This was his real family. And this time, He knew he had finally found where he truly belonged. Jack never thought his life would turn out this way, but for the first time, he was grateful for every hardship that had led him here. The motorcycle school was thriving, busier than ever, with new students signing up months in advance. What had started as a desperate attempt to find a new purpose after his injury had grown into something bigger than he had ever imagined. His name carried weight in the community now, not because of some fleeting family reputation, but because of what he had built with his own hands. People respected him not for his last name, but for what he had created, for the knowledge he shared, and for the second chances he gave to kids who had nowhere else to go. But success was not what made Jack truly happy. It was not the money or the recognition or even proving his parents wrong. It was Mia. She had been there from the moment his life had started to shift, pushing him when he needed it, holding him together when he felt like falling apart. She never treated him like he was broken, even when his leg made it impossible to work the way he used to, even when the pain kept him awake at night, reminding him of what he had lost. She never let him feel alone. When he asked her to marry him, it was not some grand romantic gesture, not a picture-perfect moment pulled from a movie. It was just them, sitting in the garage after a long day, drinking coffee and watching the sun go down. He had looked at her, at the way she fit so easily into his world, and realized he did not need to wait for some perfect moment, because she was already his perfect moment. She said yes before he even finished the question, laughing as she tackled him into a kiss that tasted like coffee and motor oil and home. Their wedding was small, nothing extravagant, just a handful of friends, his students, and people who had become more of a family to him than his own blood ever had. Max trotted down the aisle with the rings tied to his collar, and when Mia kissed him at the altar, Jack knew with absolute certainty that this was the life he was meant to have. Things were not perfect, and they never would be. His legs still ached on cold nights, and sometimes the phantom pain was bad enough to wake him up in the middle of the night. But now, instead of lying awake alone, staring at the ceiling, Mia was always there, wrapping her arms around him and pressing a sleepy kiss to his shoulder before whispering, "You are not alone." And he believed her. Jack no longer lived for the approval of those who had abandoned him. He no longer chased after love that was never real in the first place. He no longer wasted his time on people who only saw him as a means to an end. Instead, he built a life with those who truly valued him, with the woman who had never left his side, with the students who looked up to him, with the family he had chosen. This was his future, not the one his parents had planned for him, not the one they had tried to force him into, but the one he had created on his own terms. So what do you think? Would you have cut them off the way Jack did, or would you have given them another chance? Have you ever had to walk away from family to build a better life for yourself? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts.